computer. So good afternoon, Dr. Rebecca. It's so
Hi.
lovely to have you on. We had a brief chat a few weeks ago about this subject, and I thought it'd be really good for you to introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them what you actually
Yeah.
do.
No, brilliant. Lovely to be here. Thanks very much for asking me. So, I'm Dr. Rebecca Lewis. I'm a GP and menopause specialist, and I'm a clinical director at Newson Health Menopause and Wellbeing Centre, and where we see people who have menopause and help them through their menopause and with treatments. And so we have an enormous experience really of how menopause can affect women, and it can be so varied. And we see a lot of different sort of behaviours associated with menopause as well. Um, and it'd be a great opportunity to share that with you and your listeners, and how menopause can affect women in all ways, but certainly with alcohol as well. So it'd be a great opportunity to talk about
Yeah,
that.
I
Mm,
think this a great opportunity because most of my clients that I work with are women
mm,
between 35 and 55.
yes,
And a lot of them do start to recognize symptoms of perimenopausal, right? And I've
mm,
written some
mm,
similarities
mm,
with people who have symptoms of excessive drinking, and
mm,
that includes brain fog, hot
mm,
flushes,
mm.
mood swings,
Yeah.
anxiety, poor sleep, headaches,
Mm, mm.
bloatedness, fatigue, depression,
Yes,
low
yes.
concentration. And I suppose when women are starting perimenopausal, it's there are similarities and they
Totally.
merge, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah. All those symptoms can also occur in perimenopause. So it's very difficult for a 40, just to say what it is really, just it's no harm in sort of explaining what
Yeah.
menopause is, because it's not been talked about. It's been such a taboo, hasn't it? But
Mm.
it's defined as a year after our last natural period is menopause, and perimenopause is the time leading up to our last period. It's when our ovary starts to fail, and when we get to menopause, it has completely stopped producing any eggs. So that's menopause. But perimenopause is when it's starting to fail. And that can precede the final period. A woman may still be having periods, but that can last for 10 years before the periods actually stop. So the average age in the UK of a woman's last period is 51. Then the perimenopause can usually start in early to mid 40s, 10 years before then. When the ovarian function starts to decline, and it stops producing eggs reliably, and it stops producing those vital hormones from the ovary, which is estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Now the problem is that every cell in our body has an estrogen receptor on it, and particularly the brain area has estrogen receptors and testosterone receptors, so they're very responsive to these hormones. And as the perimenopause, the estrogen levels come up and down as the ovary stutters to a grinds to a halt over a long period of time. So it can creep up on you over months. It can be
Mm.
really insidious. We don't know it's happening to us quite often to start with. But it can play havoc on our brains and the way we perceive things. And I can explain about that later if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I think immediately I'm thinking us men have it easy,
Mm.
don't we?
Well, not always. I think you have your own problems as well, but it can be a really stormy time for women. This is the problem because some women have a lot of symptoms. We know that 75% of women will have symptoms, 25% will have just mild symptoms, and 25% will be severe symptoms. And usually these severe symptoms are from the mental health point of view. Because of these receptors in the brain, the limbic system is a really important part of our brain to do with our memory, our mood, concentration, addictive behaviors, our personality, sleep, all these sort of areas. And estrogen is really vital for all our neurotransmitters to function properly in that area. And that's things like dopamine, 5-HT, noradrenaline, to keep that on a steady supply, as it were. So when we don't have enough estrogen, that can cause, and rapid fluctuating high and low levels can cause chaos in this area of the brain, and chaos with the neurotransmitters, which in some women can make them feel very low, very flat, hyper anxious, really anxious, agitated, overwhelmed by everyday things. So, a very high functioning person can go to be almost, I can't make a decision. There's too many things. It's like having too many tabs open on your computer. I don't know which one to attack first. I can't prioritize. I can't make a decision. Weeping, tearful. And also slightly paranoid is quite a common thing, feeling people are talking about them, that they're no good, and they're failing in their job, their confidence is rock bottom. And this is what hormones can do to some women. It's really, really serious. And I've seen people sadly having to go to an inpatient in a psychiatric hospital because their symptoms are so severe. But yet no one's thinking about hormones as a cause. And it's neglected. People don't think this could be hormones because other people may have mild symptoms. We really cannot judge based on what perhaps our parents have said to us, or how our sisters are going through the menopause, or our friends. We're all unique. And the effect of these hormones is very much down to the individual. But it's a huge problem. 25% are severe. They're on their knees, literally can't get out of house. They're sort of housebound sometimes with their anxiety. It can almost be paralyzing for some people.
And I suppose there's the emotional thing of overwhelming, and what do we do when we feel overwhelmed? We want to turn the voice down, right? And alcohol does that immediately. It's and it's a reward. So if you've been feeling miserable and anxious all day, it's almost like I need something to stop me feeling this way. And that messes with all your neurotransmitters. So in your experience, have you seen alcohol and the symptoms of menopause?
Yes. Most definitely. We see it's not, of course, studied very much because unfortunately women's health has been neglected, and particularly menopause. So there's not much research done on this at all. But what we observe, and we see 4,000 women a month, so we have a good clinical experience. And me and all the other clinicians say that often women tend to drink a bit more. Perhaps they've never drunk very much, but they tend to drink a bit more. And that is found out by study. We know that there's a peak in alcohol intake between 45 and 55, the age of the perimenopause, to numb these symptoms, as you've just said. When you're exhausted, overwhelmed, it's easy for that intake that was very moderate perhaps before just to go up and up and up. And so a lot of our patients are drinking far too much. Or the converse, if someone has had a problem with alcohol in the past and maybe got on top of it, this vulnerable time for some women with the fluctuations can trigger dependency again and searching again for alcohol, and can destabilize what has potentially been a very stable few years. And we do see that too. It is a very common problem with alcohol because it's easy to have, and it does numb one to start with, doesn't it? It feel relaxed.
It's an
feel a bit
instant
calm.
fix, isn't it?
It is. It
Then,
is.
but
Yeah.
later on, as we all know, 3 o'clock, wake up, night sweats, anxiety. And
Absolutely.
then that's where the waters get muddied, whether is that the alcohol or the menopause.
Yeah. And I would always say that we can diagnose menopause by other symptoms as well. And if a woman's periods are changing and have become further apart, for example, and she might be having flushes and sweats in the day as well as night, muscle aches and pains, poor sleep, we can start treatment options for her. The most effective being HRT, which is the safest treatment for, very safe treatment, and benefits the majority of women. You have to have an individualized consultation, obviously. So then we can then see what that takes away, if that can help some of the symptoms. And So you can't blame all symptoms on perimenopause. You can't blame all symptoms on alcohol. It's often a mixture of
Yeah,
both.
yeah. And
Mm.
so, what do you suggest to your patients that come in and might admit that they're drinking too much? Do you suggest that they reduce or stop, or what do you
Yeah, I mean, I
say?
suppose it depends on the level of dependency, doesn't it? As if they're drinking, if they become really dependent, we can't just stop. We have to reduce slowly, to get in touch with their GP as well, to give support and signpost to all these supportive bodies that can help them. And I always encourage to wean down slowly. And if I'm starting HRT, they often find that when their hormones are balanced, they find it much easier to come down on the alcohol, because their anxiety is so much better. They're not feeling the need for it so much. They
Mm,
feel calmer. Their sleep is improved. Um, they're feeling more themselves in many ways, and they can reduce it slowly. I think I also say look for triggers, and that will depend on the individual, what sort of triggers they have around for their drinking, and try to make behavioural changes from that. But of course, that would depend on each person,
yeah.
isn't it? And
I mean, I work with a lot of grey area drinkers, so
mm, mm,
they're not dependent on alcohol.
no,
But
mm,
if I were to say to them, how do you feel like never drinking again? They're like,
mm,
oh, I can't do that. So there
mm,
is a
mm,
level of dependence there.
mm. But not
But I
physical.
try it. I'm not experienced in this like you are, but I
Mm,
suggest maybe that a healthier lifestyle can
mm,
only
mm,
be a good thing to deal with
totally.
these symptoms,
I,
and
that's absolutely right. I try and explain what's happened, that actually the alcohol is a depressant, and
yeah,
they'll feel worse, as you've just said, waking up at 3 in the morning, and the terrible anxiety and low mood the next day, and it's really making them feel much, much worse. And strategies to sort of try and reduce their intake is really,
yeah. And
really
what
vital.
what is HRT? What?
So it's just 3 words, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
hormone replacement therapy. So we said the perimenopause, the ovaries failing, and this is the main producer of the estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. So those hormones naturally will fall away. So HRT is just replacing those hormones back to the level they were when we were having regular periods before the perimenopause. So for the average woman in her 30s, it's not giving high doses like the pill, for contraceptive pill, which is a synthetic progesterone, estrogen, and given much higher doses. So it's just replacing or topping up. It's really in the perimenopause, women will still have hormones, but they're not nice, stable, regular supply of hormones because the ovary is not working properly. So we just top up the hormone, so it's a nice, stable level all the time. And the beauty now, what has really transformed HRT, is a new regulated body identical plant-based HRT, which
Oh,
is exactly as it sounds. It's exactly the same structure of the estrogen produced by the woman's ovaries, and progesterone and testosterone. And these, mirror the same structure. So they work much better on our organs and our cells because it recognizes it as self. It gets into the brain areas as well and replenishes the supply, gives the brain, and the brain likes that. The limbic system really wants a nice, steady, regular supply of estrogen. So all the neurotransmitters are in order and settled, and not too low. And so that's all HRT is. It's replacing the hormones the woman has naturally lost through her perimenopause. And we know now there were some horror stories, weren't there? I mean, 20 years ago, that it caused breast cancer.
mm,
And this was because of a terrible study in America that was, well, it was a good study in one way, but it was badly analysed. The incorrect statistics were applied to the data and released to the general press before it was looked at by all the other people involved in the study and peer reviewed. And it came out saying that there was an increased risk of breast cancer and stroke. And they looked again, and people stopped their HRT, and were really worried about it. they've subsequently looked at the statistics and analysed them correctly. And the opposite has been found almost, that women who just have estrogen only HRT have a slightly lower risk of breast cancer after taking it for 18 years, which is amazing. And that really needs to get out there. People who have estrogen and progesterone, these are women who have wombs, they must have progesterone to protect the womb from the estrogen. Which is given. These women who had estrogen and progesterone had a very slight increased risk of breast cancer, but the increased risk was not statistically significant. It was one extra case in 1,000 women, which is a tiny amount. And this didn't reach. It could have happened by chance alone. That's what not statistically significant means. It could have happened by chance alone, and that increased risk was with the very old-fashioned type of progestogens they're called, and estrogen, with a much more synthetic, not plant-based. So that increased risk was less than the increased risk of breast cancer from drinking 2 units of alcohol every night. That carried a slightly higher risk.
I know. And I heard recently that if you've had breast cancer and you still drink, the chance of reoccurrence goes up by 33% if you still drink.
Well, yes, I don't know about statistics exactly, but it will go. It's a real problem, alcohol and cancers, and breast cancer being one of them. And if you're not exercising and put on weight, obesity is a real big problem of all sorts of cancers, including breast cancer. That's much higher risk of getting a breast cancer is being obese than having HRT.
I attended a talk with Jamie Oliver actually, and there was a huge campaign on obesity, and it actually went down like a lead balloon at the time. But with obesity, you think of poor food choices with drinking. Like when I was drinking, I all my plans of diet would go out the window, and I'd get the pizza out the freezer, or I'd order the takeaway, the Deliveroo, the Chinese, and then the chocolate. And it all ties in together with the making the right choices, doesn't it? And when you're going through the symptoms of menopause, that you're up against the wall, aren't you, with it all?
You really are. You really are. You're exhausted. You're tearful. You can be anyway. Low mood, increased anxiety. It's all you can do is struggle into work. And by the way, 18% of women are off for more than 8 weeks at work, that due to their menopause symptoms. It really is, the ripple effect is enormous, and the increase in alcohol intake is really significant that we see in our clinic.
But you can kind of sit in a way, right? Because I imagine if you're a woman, right, and you're going through these changes, and there must be an element of, my body's changing, I'm getting older, I'm not producing eggs, that whole psychological feeling of getting older, right? And then you're going into a workplace that you feel really irritable, you're feeling alone, and there's the element that we can talk about in a minute from the men's perspective at home of, the stereotypical, I don't know what's going on with her, she's moody, she's miserable, blah, blah, because they don't understand it. 2, I know men that don't want to understand it. And 3, is there the right information out there to help men understand it, But in the workplace, you might be sitting there and you're sweating, you might have felt like you put on weight, you haven't slept, you're feeling highly anxious. So your mind's not really on the game, is it, right? And you might have the odd comment from a colleague, so the mental strain and
it's constant because you think, to start with, women normalize their symptoms, and they say, sandwich generation, got teenage kids, got elderly relatives. Women are often the carers for the elderly as well as holding down a career and a job. It's a very stressful time of life for many women, plus fluctuating hormones messing with your neurotransmitters in your brain, increasing your anxiety. So people don't recognize themselves. They've never been anxious before, many haven't, or if they have, it becomes worse. And how to cope with all that is really, really hard, especially if they don't know what's going on. The brain fog. I've had so many women come in and really have been referred for CT scans to make sure they haven't got early dementia. They haven't. It's just the brain fog, can't get the right word. It's so important for women as well as men to understand what's going on with their bodies and their hormones. 77% in a survey we did of 3,000 women didn't know their symptoms were due to menopause.
Yeah.
Because like 20%, we all think hot flushes and night sweats, don't we? We all think of that and funny periods. But 20% of women will never get a flush or a sweat. So if we're waiting for that as the sign, some will wait forever, but have every other symptom. It's about 40, 50 symptoms of menopause. But they'll have every other thing, but not realise it.
But this is why I think it's important to raise this thing about the alcohol, because many of the symptoms are the same, so they get blurred, don't they? So
yes, absolutely. They blame it on, oh, well, I've been drinking a bit and I know, and they perhaps feel a bit guilty about that and they don't want to talk about it too much. I can understand that, so they bury it. Oh, I'm only like this because of, I'll tell you what, tomorrow I'll start cutting down. I'll start cutting down, and that day perhaps never comes because their symptoms are driving. It's a vicious cycle, isn't it? It feels so dreadful. It's a short-term relief to a certain extent and making it worse, of course.
Absolutely.
So,
and that's where the
awful.
grey area drinking comes in, where you justify your drinking by thinking, do you know what, it's just a couple of glasses of wine with dinner. There's double your weekly allocated units for a start. But on paper, it doesn't seem a lot.
I know.
Or I'm not drinking in the week, but I deserve a glass of wine Friday and Saturday, where you romanticize it because you've had such a stressful week.
Yes.
And what I mentioned about the workplace, but then you go home and you might have kids playing up and you feel out of control. You don't know how to handle it. And the old man comes in and he's like, oh God, she's off on one again.
Yeah.
And
that's absolutely right. This is how it is. You paint the picture so well of how it is for us all at home, and relationships suffer because the man, if heterosexual relationship, the partner doesn't really understand what's going on with their partner. They've changed, irritable with them, or withdrawn, much more withdrawn. Libido's out the window, so that physically they can't be intimate, and it can cause a great deal of pain for women. By the way, the vaginal symptoms can be severe. So that often, not always, but that often could be a real separation from someone who was their support network.
And it can go one way or the other, right? Because if there was more understanding, I'm really trying that, and as you rightly said about the heterosexual relationship as well, right? But I've talked to men about it, and it's I've got the feedback of, what are you talking about? Why are you talking to me about the menopause? Right? What's that all about?
Yeah.
But equally, I've had men that have been interested in my view about it, right? Because it's lack of understanding for men. I mean, I met Meg Matthews before the lockdown happened, right? And she invited me on to do a big talk, right, about the male perspective. And I said to her, what support is available for the husbands to really understand what women are going through and what the symptoms are, and maybe how we can be better, right? And she said, well, I'm not sure there are any, which felt shocking, being that was 2 or 3 years ago. But for me, it was like, surely men have to be patient, understand, listen, have empathy, and ask questions as well. Like, ask how they're feeling, and say, are you struggling today? Is there anything I can do to support you? So you're not going one way or the other. You're actually pulling together, because otherwise, I was say, oh my God, here we go again, right? You're going to pull away from me and go, you just don't understand me. So you're at two ends of the scale, right? But then that adds to your mental health issues, depression, but it adds to mine as well, because I think, God, this is pointless, and there's no sex, and what's the point of this? And I'm going down the pub
then I start drinking more.
Yeah.
It's
It's an absolute, I mean, I couldn't agree more. The tsunami effect, not the ripple effect. This is like a tsunami effect from menopause in the workplace, in the partners at work, partners at home. You know, romantic partners, in relationship with friends. Women withdraw quite often with their menopause because their symptoms are so bad they become isolated. They just want to sit at home in front of the television and have a drink. That's quite a common scenario we do see in some people. And I think it's so important for men to know, because it's horrid for them. It's kind of frightening for them. They can't see what's going on and want to help, and they don't know how. They get rejected, and I think it can cause a lot of depression and sadness for them too.
for both, and
For
then that has
both, exactly.
a
And then that's
knock-on effect with the kids.
and actually, we were talking to a divorce lawyer who has done a podcast for us, and in fact, out of 1,000 divorce cases she had, 85% cited menopause as one of the reasons. It is a hugely vulnerable time for relationships, for previous addictions, and not just alcohol, other addictions, because we're vulnerable for eating disorders. All these sorts of things we see come to the fore. There's no research done on this, of course, because it hasn't been looked at. But we see with our eyes how it can happen. It's common sense when something can make some women feel so dreadful and anxious and vulnerable. You can see why these patterns of behaviour develop, for maybe the first time or recurring. And I think information is key. And we have the Balance app, which is a free app for everybody. Men can go on there, and there's a website, balance-menopause.com, and there are resources there, and there's actually a leaflet for partners. And there's lots of leaflets explaining about what menopause is, what's happening with the hormones in the brain. There's one on alcohol as well, and how to minimize the impact. So we've had, just anecdotally, when women hormones are replaced with HRT, which is very safe, the body identical HRT, they feel they're sleeping, they can cut down their alcohol, they're exercising more because they've got energy and interest, and they feel back to their normal selves, their personalities back to how they used to be for many women. And it can be transformational for some people. And of course, lifestyle is so important. But when you're drinking a lot, it's very, very difficult to make that. Just slowly changes, isn't it? But ideally we want to get the exercise up, and mindfulness, and walking daily if we can, and then gradually that might come into a jog, or going to the gym regularly, eating healthily. But as you say, when you're drinking a lot, you're just going to have a pizza takeaway, aren't we?
Yeah, it's a combination of different ingredients in the pot, isn't it?
It is. It's a perfect storm, if you like, isn't it?
Yeah. But if you make these changes, so that's education, talking, being open about it.
Have the conversation. Well, like we're having now, actually, I'm hoping this is really going to help some of your listeners to sort of understand that menopause could be part of the solution, part of the reason, and there are solutions for that to treat the menopause.
And you know what? You go on Instagram and there's loads of accounts all about the menopause, but there's rarely anything about the male side. And I'm not saying that to be, well, what about us? No, I'm saying it to say maybe there's an avenue there that needs exploring. Men, like you've just said about your amazing app, and what I do, I'll put the details in the show notes after the episode, because that's fantastic. But maybe there needs to be more men talking about it as well, and to help other men, because it is a thing, it's a real thing. I mean, I saw an episode of Everyone Loves Raymond, right? And it was actually done really, really well.
Was it? Yeah.
Where she was like all over the place with her mood. And he basically said, I don't know what to do. Like, I really don't know what to do. And she said, I don't know, next time, just give me a hug. And the next scene, she was all over the place again. And he went to hug her and she went, get off of me. I don't want you anywhere near me. And it was so the man's like, I can't do what I'm doing wrong. Do you know what I mean? It was like,
but very hard.
Yeah,
it's very, very hard, I think.
But that's why I say patience, understanding, listening,
And maybe rather than think about getting your end away, just give her a hug and say, look, are you okay? Are you feeling okay today? You know, and
couldn't agree more. I think even though, you know, if people are very anxious or irritable, inside they're vulnerable. They're really, really vulnerable, and you
and
know, they want,
scared.
and frightened. Yeah, the anxiety, frightened of things that you wouldn't even think would be frightening, but they can cause enormous anxiety for no reason almost. So having that security and protection and love is so important in people's recovery and getting them feeling better, definitely.
And do you see things are changing compared to 5 years ago with this subject?
What, menopause or alcohol?
Menopause, like,
Yes, totally. I think the conversation has really changed. We've seen Davina, haven't we, out and the television.
yeah,
People are
yeah,
getting more aware and they're getting angry actually because they've suddenly realized how long their suffering has been going on. I've
yeah.
seen women who've given up really good jobs because of their menopause. Relationships have broken down because of menopause. You know, bad behaviors have been established, like drinking, because of menopause. And if only they had known at the beginning, then
Mm,
they're empowered with how they might like to manage their own menopause. If they're aware that they've had a problem in the past, this is one of the times. There are lots of times of life changes, and this is one of the life changes that can cause you know, a vulnerable time for women and increase the risk of drinking again, for example. So if people are aware of that before, then, you know, forewarned is forearmed, isn't it?
yeah.
Knowledge is power. And then they can be aware of how many treatments there are, the most effective being HRT and how safe that is with a new type of HRT, and how that can really help many people if they wish to look at that. Or there are alternatives like the lifestyle techniques and the mindfulness, regular exercise, having a really healthy diet. Because when we lose our hormones, there are also some health risks people should be aware of: increased risk of brittle bones and heart disease
Mm,
and diabetes, because we've lost the vital estrogen hormones. So it's important that either we replace the hormones to help reduce that, which it does by half, by 50%, it reduces the risk of heart disease if you start it within 10 years of your last period, HRT, and reduces the risk of osteoporosis and fractured hips, etc., when we're in our 70s and 80s. But you know, other things as well. Exercising, weight bearing exercise helps
yeah.
bone density, cardiovascular exercise to help the heart as well. And doing everything together is really good. Often it's not an either or. It's a lot of women do both, and you know, we should all be having a healthier lifestyle. But it's that really can help our mental health. You know, getting out and walking, mindfulness, practicing that in a regular way can be very helpful.
And I think, you know, like when I work with grey area drinkers, um, there's this whole moderation myth. It's a
Mm,
nightmare. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
once there's an issue with alcohol, to moderate is virtually impossible. I think there's
Mm,
less than 5%. So it's about making the right choices, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's possibly thinking, right, do you know what? I'm going to give myself a month off alcohol to see if my symptoms feel different, you know?
Yeah.
So mixed with what you've just wonderfully said about the exercise, the healthy eating, the
Mm,
mindfulness, some breath work, you
mm,
know, some journaling. You know, I always suggest
mm,
people journal their feelings down. You know, a
totally.
bit like Columbo at the end of the
Mm,
month, you can look
mm.
back and you can analyze your mood swings and that, and maybe
Oh, I think
recognize
that's really good.
patterns.
I think that's really good because when you're making thought errors, we call them, you know, perhaps a bit paranoid, no one likes me, everyone hates me. If you write that down and then come back and reflect and say, would my friends say this about me? No, they
Yeah,
wouldn't. It puts perspective back, and it makes people think, hang on, this is me being anxious. This is not the truth, actually.
yeah,
Or likewise, if they've come back in a month, think, gosh, I was really, when I was drinking more and whatever, I was really thinking a certain pattern or a certain way of thinking, and it's changed because I've done all these sorts of things. I think that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and low self-esteem taps into it as well. So when I look at the comparisons of the symptoms of drinking too much, as I said before, all the different areas there, low self-esteem is a big one. Lack of self-worth, right?
Yeah.
It's like when you're going through these symptoms, your body's changing, you know you're getting older, and all this, it can chip away your self-esteem, right? So when you mix in the booze, so I always suggest it's not about like, that's it, you're in the menopause now, that's the end of your drinking career. But I just think it's really good opportunity to take it out to see how you feel. And I can pretty much guarantee you will feel better by
I agree with
removing
you.
it.
Totally.
And then you can go from there, you know, and see how it goes month to month to month, you know. And
yeah, definitely.
it's all about making right choices in life. And when we get older, we have to start to do that, menopause or not. We have to look at, you know, how our liver slows down, how our weight gain increases easier, you know. Like I look at lads and girls of 25, they eat anything and they're stick thin, you know, and I'm eating a stick of celery and I put on 6 pounds.
But that's right. I mean, you know, again, the estrogen affects our liver and our enzymes in there. So when we lose it, you know, our metabolism changes and how we metabolize alcohol and other things. Our gut microbiome changes with the loss of estrogen. So it just affects every single part of our body for many people. And being aware of that is really important, I think. The other thing I think people think, it just creeps up. They think, oh, I just have a couple of glasses, and they're home glasses. They're probably 250 ml. I mean, that is an enormous. That's 3/4 of a bottle of night. That's, you know, 7 or 8 units sometimes. You know, with large glasses, or 6 units, isn't it? You know, so it's much more than people think. A glass of wine is 1 unit. That is not correct.
No.
You know.
Now, home pouring's a big thing, but also, you know, it's what else is there is the big question, and what you've just so articulately said about options to do different things. You know, like it could be tonight the sun's out. Don't romanticize alcohol by going, I could sit in the garden with a nice glass of wine, right? It's like, do you know what? I could go out for a nice walk and get some fresh air in my lungs and listen to a podcast, or, you know, there are healthy options, I think, are how you frame it in your life rather than, well,
terribly
I feel
important.
this crap anyway, so I might as well just have a drink, you know, justify it. And this is how I speak to people that work with me, is how we speak to ourselves about the language we use for ourselves. And also the options we choose, and don't romanticize alcohol, because it's never going to be a glass of wine, a beer with the condensation running down the glass in the garden. It all sounds wonderful, right?
Yes. I like that phrase, don't romanticize alcohol, because that's what people do the whole time. In our society, it's fed to us, isn't it? You know,
absolutely. It's drip fed from the start, right? But we do it ourselves. We lie to ourselves to justify it. But deep down, we're not in denial, because we know where it's going to go. You know, most people know that it's not going to be 1 glass of wine. It could be 2. And the people I work with, it could be a bottle, or they go into the second bottle thinking, I'll just have 1 more, like my podcast, 1 for the road. They have that. But before you know it, they're a bottle and a half each time they have a drink. And then that escalates to 2, you know, so it's so accumulative, alcohol, you know, because your tolerance levels goes up, and then you get away with it more, but you don't get away with it. So you know, it's
I know it's really hard, and alcohol makes menopause symptoms worse. The anxiety, it stimulates hot flushes and night sweats and poor sleep, which they're having anyway. So it's just,
I know, it's that hamster
compounding the
wheel,
whole
right?
thing.
So it's breaking
Hamster
it
wheel,
down,
vicious
putting it in
cycle.
front of you and going, do you know what are the better options here? And that's why I say journaling works, because you can write it down in front of you, see it for what it is, and go, right, okay, I need to think about doing this as a trial. You don't have to say, right, that's it, and go running in the street and saying, do you know what? I'm never drinking again. You can say, I'm going to give it a month, and I'm going to go to bed early every single night to see if I can get some restorative sleep. I'm going to go to the gym when I would normally fancy a drink, so it removes the association.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And you can, do you know, other people, that jigsaw puzzles are a fantastic distraction, you know.
Yep.
Get 1,000-piece jigsaw, sit down before you know it's 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Eat earlier, you know, like change, have more routine so your blood sugar levels are more balanced, you know, because you know, there are a lot of people that don't eat to allow for the calories for the booze.
I see.
You know,
Yes.
so you're yo-yoing your blood sugar levels as well. The acronym HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, any of those things, which you get with the symptoms in the menopause, right?
Yeah, totally.
All of them.
Yeah.
So it's about breaking it down, putting it in front of you, and then thinking, right, I need to make some different choices here. And then you're in for a bit of and let's not forget, talk to the partner and open the conversation.
Absolutely. And if you need a leaflet to start things off, and you can go through the leaflet together and say, or on the app, you can have all your symptoms documented, and you can talk together why you're feeling that, and irritability. And I think doing it, you know, going through things together would really helpful for couples.
Okay. I've really appreciated this podcast. Do you want to just remind the listeners what the app is called so they can have a look at it and download it?
It's called Balance, and it's free. It's Balance app, Balance Menopause app, and the website is balance-menopause.com, which
Fantastic.
some people prefer that. But lots of resources there, and information for partners, and information about menopause in general. So
that is absolutely
hope
brilliant.
that's helpful.
No, absolutely brilliant. I'm so grateful. And I'll also put the links to your website and the app on the show notes of this episode. So thank you so much for joining. And
thank you for having me.
Soon.
Thank you so much. It's been great.